Hi, this is Travis McDonald again, doing some more of the Architectural Elements series. Today we want to talk about Thomas Jefferson and Palladianism. Kind of a big topic, but we'll also get into some details. So what do we mean by Palladianism? It goes back to a 16th century architect in Italy during the Italian Renaissance, a man named Andrea Palladio. And Jefferson is considered one of the best practitioners of this architect style that was carried on after Palladio's time, used in England in the 1700s, and it's in Jefferson's education as an architect, the self-education, that he loves the principles and the designs of Palladio's work and carries on using his own brand of Palladian architecture. So we're going to explore some of those things as they relate to Poplar Forest as a Palladian villa, which is really one of the more pure definitions of a villa retreat and also of Palladian villas. Palladio was very famous for doing these villas outside of Venice that the noblemen could go to into the countryside, and that's part of the Palladian heritage that Jefferson picks up on. So we'll move in a little closer and talk about some other aspects. Hi, we're now up on the north portico of Poplar Forest, and I want to talk a little bit more about the biography, the background of Andrea Palladio. He was a stonecutter up north of Venice in the hill country, and he was taken in by a nobleman, Count Crosino, and educated to become an architect. And he fortunately followed the advice of a first century Roman architect named Vitruvius. The writings of Vitruvius are the only surviving documents from ancient Rome that deal with architecture. And what Vitruvius had advocated in the first century was that to be a good architect, to be an architect, you needed to do four things. You needed to have a liberal arts education. You needed to study construction and how buildings were built. You needed to study the best buildings from the ancient world, classical architecture. And you needed to know and study the best buildings of your contemporary time. And if you did all those things, you would be a good architect. Well, Palladio and his educator gave him that path to becoming an architect. And Palladio famously studies all the remains of Roman buildings. All the classical ruins, for the most part, are surviving buildings from ancient Rome. And he then becomes an architect, building and designing his own buildings up in the Veneto hill country of Italy. And the reason why Palladio becomes famous in his time and after his time was that he published a book. It's actually called The Four Books of Architecture. And he not only depicts and draws and shows the buildings of ancient Rome, of Roman classical architecture, but Palladio shows his own designs, his very modern villas that he had designed, as well as some innovative church designs and palazzos, or urban palaces, that he designed. And more importantly, in his book, he simplifies the classicism of Roman architecture. Whereas if anybody went and looked at the ruins themselves, as Palladio did, they would see that there was an incredible variety of details. So there wasn't just one type of Doric column. There were dozens of Doric columns, not one type of Corinthian, but many. So what Palladio did was to simplify all of those aspects and just put down in his book, here's how to do a Doric column, here's how to do an Ionic column, here's how to do a Corinthian column. And those all came with the rules of how to design using those orders. So here on the front portico, we can look at the exterior order that Jefferson's using. This is what's called a Tuscan order column. Tuscan was the lowest form of the Roman orders. And Jefferson thought this was appropriate, but it looks like a big piece of carved stone. But even Palladio took some shortcuts and used some tricks that he learned from the ancient Romans, which is to build a column out of bricks, out of pie-shaped bricks that form the radius, and to then cover those bricks with a lime stucco, or they called it a render. And when you did that, it looked like one big carved piece of stone. The dimensions of this, the size is all regulated. So you take a diameter of a Tuscan, and that should be the height, 7 diameters in height. And then all the different moldings of the capital and the base are all different divisions of that round module, which is the diameter. And so that differs from every order, Doric, Corinthian, Ionic. And so one of the things Jefferson loves about Palladio that he called his Bible was he set out all the rules of how to design perfect proportions that had been tested for thousands of years. And we'll see that it's not just the way it looks or the size, but Palladio used a holistic type of design, and Jefferson follows in his footsteps and does the same thing. So now we'll go on to the interior and talk about some aspects. Okay, now we're on the inside of the house, and I'm going to talk about a few important Palladian features. So if we look at the floor plan, it's obviously an octagon on the exterior. That's one difference with Palladio. Palladio did not use octagons, but the inheritors of Palladio's designs and thoughts in England in the 1700s, the people we call British Palladians, they used a lot of octagons. And that's where Jefferson gets his love of octagons, from these British books from the 1700s. But if we look at the big octagon, we can see that it's divided up into different rooms. Palladio came up with a system of design that was very ingenious. He used certain modules of room sizes, and just put them together in different combinations. Jefferson does that with his own typology of shapes. So if we look at the parlor, you can see that it's a big octagon, just stretched out. And then Jefferson uses 6 half octagons, divided either by the front passage or by the 2 beds that are in the middle of the room. And then the biggest shape is the cube room, which is the most important. So it gets the biggest size shape. And then the smallest squares are the 2 stair pavilions. They are minor features, and so they're smaller. And they're also not taking up any of the room of the main floor, which Palladio advocates. He said you shouldn't spend a lot of space and money on staircases. And Jefferson definitely followed that advice. So if we look at this whole plan, there are a lot of things going on, and it really is a holistic design, meaning that all the parts work with each other, and they work with the whole design, and there's also a integrity to the structural part of the house and its design. So if we look at some of the most common Roman and Palladian ideas, there's something called decorum. that means you use a certain design feature in the most appropriate ways, but always in the right sequence. So as we said, on the outside, you have Tuscan columns. That's the lowest Roman order. When you walk into the middle room, you've jumped up to the Doric order. And if you follow all the way through to the fanciest room, the parlor, you've jumped up again to an Ionic order. So those were very important things in classical and also Renaissance designs. The other thing that you'll see that is a structural combination of elements is that these big triangular things here are the chimney masses. Big, heavy masses of the chimney that always have a fireplace going in two directions, serving all the rooms of the house. But this big structural heavy mass is also connected to this cube room, which goes up 20 feet. 20 feet could be kind of a shaky structure, but these triangular masses of the fireplace act as buttresses, like a Gothic cathedral, where the buttresses are supporting a big middle section that might be a little flimsy. So Jefferson uses this design to do many things at once. These act like buttresses. They give you a fireplace on each room, each end of each room. And the fireplace also defines the end shape of the room, which makes all of these an octagon or a half octagon. So Jefferson, like Palladio, is designing in a holistic sense, using all the right proportions from the classical rules that Palladio lays down. So the height of every room determines the size of the moldings at the top, which are called entablature. The entablature in this room is Tuscan because this is a bed chamber, so that's appropriate for a bed chamber. And when we get into the other rooms, you'll see that it changes. The entablature changes, but it's always related to an imaginary column that is below it, and that's set by the rules and proportions that Palladio lays down. Palladio even says that the size of a window opening determines the size of the architrave molding that goes around the window opening. So he says 1/6 of this window opening is the size of this molding. And all the moldings that Jefferson's using, that Palladio used, are all coming from Roman classical buildings. We're now in the center of Poplar Forest, which is the 20-foot cube that was used as a dining room. And this space really is a very close connection to Palladio because twice in his lifetime, Jefferson tried to build a copy of Palladio's famous house called the Villa Rotunda, which was a house that had 4 symmetrical facades and had a large, tall center room that Palladio called the Sala. And this is really as close as Jefferson ever got to building a rotunda house. This tall 20-foot space is surrounded by the 12-foot ceilings of the perimeter rooms. And so this is really, Jefferson's rotunda. And if you look up on the top of the wall, you'll see the entablature that was used in this room, which is the Doric order from Roman Doric buildings. And that is proportioned for an imaginary column that would be underneath. That's why it's so large. And in this case, Jefferson is taking something from the Roman prototype called the Baths of Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian, and Jefferson is adding the ox skull to what should just be the face of Apollo. And this is a case where Jefferson kind of bends the rules and doesn't follow the Palladian or the Roman examples exactly. And Jefferson says this is his private house, and that's why he can fiddle with the details. And even Palladio says he always adds a little something extra to his buildings that makes them something special. So we're going to go into one other room, which is the parlor, and see what the entablature looks like in there. We're now in the octagonal parlor, which would be considered the best room of the house. In this room, we have jumped up to a higher Roman order. This is one that Palladio depicts in his book. It comes from a famous temple called the Temple of Fortuna Virilis, which was a Roman temple in Rome. And this is an order and an example of ornamentation that Jefferson uses over and over. He uses it at Monticello, he uses it at Poplar Forest, and he uses it at the University of Virginia. But this is all part of the proportional system. It's part of the decorum of using the right ornaments in the right sequence. And Jefferson, as I said, is putting all of this together in a very studied way that is not unlike how Palladio designed his villas, where the decoration of each little part was based on a proportional system based on Roman examples. The structure is all part of the design of the interior rooms. The exterior has all of its proper parts designed after Roman buildings, but all in this one whole, well thought out design. So that's why it's the essence of Palladio that Jefferson is following. He's not following just a copy of what looks like a Palladian villa, but it's his system of design that is so Palladian. So now we're going to go and look at a couple of things on the exterior. So here we're outside on the east side of the house that you see behind me, and we're shaded by this double row of trees, which is a nice thing to do for shade, but these trees have a more interesting function, and we'll see that in a minute. But Jefferson is being very clever with how he's doing landscape and how it relates to Palladian architecture. So we'll go take a look at something else that's related to this double row of trees. So we were just in the middle of this double row of trees, and we can see how that works as a Palladian device. So Palladio would have the center building of a villa with two pavilions that were connected by wings. That's called a five-part Palladian plan. Jefferson is doing that with landscape. Here's his villa, and instead of pavilions, he uses two mounds that are symmetrical on each side of the house, here and here. And then he connects the house to the mounds with a double row of trees. So the trees are acting like the wings, or called a hyphen, that connects the villa to the pavilions. So these were practical because Jefferson is using the dirt from digging out the south lawn to create these mounds. And then each of the two mounds were planted with 3 rows of trees, making it much more vertical. Those trees have not been restored on the mound, but we have restored that connection of trees to the house. So we'll go farther out on the lawn and see how this Palladian plan works in sequence. Here we are on the south lawn of Poplar Forest, and you see the house behind me that's in the center. We were just over near the the west mound, which had originally trees, but between the mound and the house, you see that double row of trees connecting it all in the 5-part plan. And on the other side of the mound, you can also see the octagonal privy, which you could even say makes it a 7-part plan because there's a symmetrical privy on the other side. Jefferson takes out part of the connection of trees on the east here, 5 years after he's living here, to build the wing. This is a wing with 4 service rooms, and there's more discussion of that in one of the other videos, but this wing is one of the most Palladian features of the whole place, because Palladio had these service wings connected to his villas. What he didn't have was a flat deck on top. That's Jefferson's invention. And so this wing theoretically should be balanced on the opposite side, but Jefferson only did one wing on the east side. And once he built that wing, it connects the house to the mound over on the east side, and then there's another privy on the other side of that mound. So the Palladian wing in Palladio's villas in Italy had agricultural uses. Jefferson is using this wing to put the kitchen, the smokehouse, the laundry, group these things together so that you don't have to put these separate buildings out here in the landscape. He'd rather do landscape gardening. So this wing was also something he did at Monticello. And then right before this wing at Poplar Forest, he adds 2 wings to the White House where he's living. And those are all connected to Palladio's original wings from the 1500s. So all of these things together add up to a very Palladian villa, very Palladian design, and Jefferson being kind of the best practitioner of Palladian architecture and principles in America. So I hope you have some sense now of what it means to be Palladian and why Poplar Forest is a Palladian villa.